Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Meena Shamaly from filmandgamecomposers.com, and today we are speaking to Mr. Austin Wintory, the man behind the beautiful music of the video games such as the critically acclaimed Journey and the Banner Saga, as well as film festival hits such as Captain Abu Ra'id and Grace. His work on Journey has been nominated for a Grammy, and he's won multiple awards for his numerous contributions in the world of video games and film. So his latest project that we're about to experience is the soundtrack to Ubisoft's next installment in the fight between the Assassins and the Templars, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Hello, Austin.
Well, hello, and off the bat, let me congratulate you on successfully pronouncing Captain Abu Ra'id, which is extraordinarily uncommon.
Well, I am Middle Eastern in my background, so I can say that.
Well, it's just, it's amazing to me how atypically, where are you from? Or, like, where does your origin sort of trace back to?
It's part Egyptian, part Lebanese.
All right. So similar brand or flavor of Arabic then as the sort of Jordanian and Palestinian and
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. That's great. I love the language. I discovered a love for the language working on that film, and then I also discovered how easily butchered, and not least of which by me. It's not like I speak it, but I said Captain Abu Ra'id enough times to get close enough that I could appreciate how badly most people say it. Not through any fault of their own, of course. But anyway, I couldn't not comment on that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So you grew up in Denver, didn't you? I've been to Denver. Denver's nice.
I did indeed.
How'd you end up in LA?
Well, because I wanted to pursue the life of a composer, and this, especially at that time, the conventional wisdom was all roads point to LA. Even in the 10 years that I've lived here, it's become decentralized enough that when people ask me, do I need to live in LA? Like when people are just getting started with their career, they've just graduated school or whatever, and they ask that question, which is a common one, do I need to live in Los Angeles? My answer is, has gone from an, oh, absolutely yes to a, well, maybe, depends.
Yeah.
If you'd be happy here, then we'd love to have you here. And there's no question that it's the best place to live for film.
Yeah.
But though even that is not some iron law.
Yeah.
But for games, the industry is so global and it so naturally exists in the ecosystem of the internet that you can kind of live anywhere. But all that said, I do love living here, and I came here, exactly 10 years ago. I had actually lived in Manhattan between the two, in New York, and so I went from Denver to New York, went to school for a while, and came out here and actually finished school and just kind of rolled straight into the career. And actually, literally a month and a half or something like that ago was my 10 years in LA anniversary. So it's been a wild ride, I will say.
And you've been going back to Denver with the Colorado Symphony Orchestra recently. Are there any plans to perform at the Red Rocks Amphitheater?
Well, we did a show actually at Red Rocks this past August. I regularly join my friend Tommy Tallarico on stage for Video Games Live shows, which is his tour that he takes all over the world, performing music from games of all eras, from Mario, Zelda, and Metroid to current releases.
He came to Melbourne this year, and you were notably absent.
If I hadn't been insanely under the gun finishing up a couple things, I would have been there. I wouldn't have missed it. It was actually working on this film with my friend Amin, the director of Captain Abu Ra'id, that completely prevented me from doing anything. But I was able to slip away very briefly to do a show at Red Rocks.
Oh, nice.
With him, with Tommy, and we were able to do some Journey and then actually premiere a little bit of the Banner Saga 2, which was fun.
Oh, lovely. That's pretty awesome.
So yeah, and Red Rocks, that was a dream. I mean, that is an unbelievable venue. I mean, I grew up in Denver and in a way took for granted its sort of legendary, iconic status because it was a place that was, kind of in our backyard. In the same way that if you grew up in New York, you're like, well, Carnegie Hall is just a place to go for a concert. And it's hard to appreciate, like, the legends that have stood on that stage and that sort of thing. And walking around backstage at Red Rocks and seeing the photos of all the past performers that they have on the walls there, I was like, God damn, I can't believe I'm here right now. And Tommy was great because being a Colorado native, and the fact that the orchestra on stage was the Colorado Symphony, which is like the orchestra I grew up in the seats, watching, and part of what made me want to be a composer was seeing them. To be on that stage with that orchestra, Tommy really wanted to play that up as like, the native son returns, and it was really special. It was really wonderful. I loved it. So I do love Denver. I'm happily living in LA, but
Yeah,
I have family there, and
of course.
you never lose it, I think.
That's awesome. Well, your latest project that we're about to experience is the soundtrack to Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which is dropping October 23rd alongside the game. And Ubisoft has always paid a great deal of attention to the music of the Assassin's Creed franchise, and they've always worked with some fantastic composers, and they've turned out some brilliant soundtracks. So, what's it like joining in that tradition of great music for Assassins?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the Assassin's Creed franchise is that there's a fairly wide variety within the scores for the each individual game, which is impressive considering that there is a pretty cohesive vibe, for lack of a better way to put it, from one game to the next. And even as big a change as Black Flag was from the others, it still to me felt like an Assassin's Creed game through and through. A lot of people seem to feel otherwise and were like, this was a fun pirate game. I wouldn't call it Assassin's Creed, but I liked it. And I could see their point, but to me it did. It felt, because the idea of Assassin's Creed to me transcends any one given time frame and location just by virtue of the story they're telling. So, between like the Sarah Schachner, Brian Tyler music in Black Flag versus the music that she wrote alongside Chris Tilton for Unity, to obviously where it all started with Jesper Kyd on the first few and Lauren on the third one, Olivier and on Brotherhood, and all these iterations are able to they've been able to kind of carve out their own space. All that said, I feel very, very lucky because when I was hired, they very specifically said, we want you to kind of rather dramatically ignore all of that, and not feel beholden to any prior AC score. And that is surprising. When you're on your 9th entry, there have been 6 main games and 3 of the kind of big DLCs that are all but full sequels of their own. You'd think they'd be pretty set in their ways. And the audio director, Lydia Andrew, was amazing, because the first thing she said, they called me and they said, look, we want to hear what you would do for what would you do in Victorian London, in the Assassin's Creed universe. And I thought about it, and I hit them back with an idea, thinking they're gonna kindly move on and I'll never hear from them again. And bewilderingly, they immediately said, when can you start? And it was a joy, because I was able to really do something personal and something that was very challenging, that it was for me very difficult. And it's really nothing like the prior ACs, but more important than that, it was nothing like I felt like I had ever done. And that's always my goal, is I want to feel like I'm doing something that I can't really point to a prior example within my own career of doing. And they indulged that, and I had enormous creative freedom. It just absolutely, they did not look over my shoulder. They did not tell me what to do or what not to do. The guidelines, to the degree that they did tell me those things, I completely agreed. Like the parameters that were set, I was like, oh, I agree. That's what's right for the game. So it was not creative curtailing so much as just a total alignment of vision, which was really shocking.
Man, that's amazing. So what was that thing that you pitched first and thought they were gonna kindly move on? Was it just like a theme or an action or a suite or an action piece? What you give them?
I sent them a few cues. I actually, they because they reached out to me, and they reached out to a couple of other composers, I assume. I don't really know exactly how the process worked on their side, but I know that they basically called me and said, we're very interested in working with you, but we'd love for you to basically, we're going to tell you about the game, and then we'd love for you to pitch us your idea. And that's a pretty common way
Yeah.
that these bigger, more um, studios like this, that's how they tend to work, and that's fine. And so their pitch, was still, the game was still obviously missing a lot. This was a year ago, so the game was missing a lot, and but they'd also been working on it for a while, so a lot of the basics were known. We knew it was a brother sister twin story.
Yeah.
We knew that it was Victorian London, and we knew the nature of the bad guys, and the dynamic between the two of them relative to the Templars, and the kind of moral gray area that Jacob in particular is going to push the boundaries of, and that sort of thing. And so they spelled all that out, and then I got a boatload of concept art and some video capture of some early sort of alpha prototype gameplay, most of which was just reiterating like, okay, yeah, these are all the same, because I've played all the prior ACs, and I was like, yeah, all the familiar tropes are there, the reach high point and leaps of faith and the whole thing. And so looking at it, I was like, I'm not normally one to pitch that the music be like period music, because I feel like that's looking at the wrong details to inspire you. It's like, if the game takes place in the 1860s, then the 1860s-ness should be coming from the game. Why does the score need to beat the player over the head with that idea if the game is already successfully doing it, or trying to do it? In this case, very successfully, I think, because they did a beautiful job. And so it's like, I don't even see the point of that. The music's there not to give you information; it's to give you subtext. It's to let you crawl deeper into the characters, whether it's protagonist or the antagonist or whomever. But it frames the experience through this lens that is accessible to only music. And so if you fail to embrace those things by just saying, well, it takes place in Victorian London, so what would Victorian London music sound like? You're really missing an opportunity. So I was like, my first thing is to figure out, what is the kind of arc of this story? What are the characters motivated by? And also, what is the sort of tone of the world that you're going to be spending a lot of time in? So there's a big kind of father-child element to this game. It's a lot about Jacob and Evie working through this reconciliation of trying to this reconciliation to their father's legacy. They've recently lost their father, and they want to try to kind of live up to who he was. And the other thing that was also very interesting to me was that the game did not include a sort of assassin origin story for the two of them, the way most every prior AC game has. Most of them have been like, you're some person who then exhibits talent, and the order of assassins kind of brings you into their fold, and the first the game is sort of you acquiring this skill and your equipment and all that sort of stuff. And in this one, you just start as two great assassins that are just great already, and you're immediately thrust into the world of Jacob and Evie as they're very young, but they are already master assassins who know this world. And that to me was also very interesting, because it kind of skipped the novelty of like, ooh, assassin, and it's like, no, we're familiar with that, so let's move on to something deeper. And I loved that.
That's brilliant.
And so all of that said, I did love the idea of a kind of 19th century chamber music vibe on modern steroids. And so I kind of referred to it jokingly as neo-Mendelssohn music, because Mendelssohn, very specifically, relative to virtually all of his 19th century counterparts, had this wonderful... I love likening his music, especially his really fast music, to Legolas, because I feel like it's an image anybody can understand. Legolas is moves with extreme precision and accuracy, but he's like a cat that's light on his feet, and he never seems to have too much forward momentum. He can just like start and stop, and he's just kind of infinitely nimble. And that's how Mendelssohn's music has always felt to me, whereas most of his counterparts were writing increasingly like heavy, dramatic. You think of operatic kind of Wagner and Brahms, even Beethoven, of this big, ultra intense and dramatic and schmaltzy and whatever. And Mendelssohn was not like that. He was quick and moving around, and that just sort of sprang to mind as soon as I looked at the game. Is like, oh, I love the lightness of texture with which he built his material, and especially his chamber music is an interesting philosophical starting point. So I started playing around with, what if I did this something that's like anti-orchestral? It's chamber music, and it's true chamber music, meaning it's not a small number of strings wishing it were a large number of strings. It's a small number of strings and other instruments that are taking total ownership of their identity as a small group, which lets you get real close up and really visceral and intense. So it was 9 strings. I said, how about 3 violins, 3 violas, 3 cellos, plus 1 additional solo, 1 for Jacob, 1 for Evie, on top of that of violin and cello. And then a few other incidental things like a couple of flutes, a couple of oboes, a couple of trumpets, and some percussion and things like that. But at its core, you have 9 strings, and these 3 violins, 3 violas, 3 cellos are not written as 3-part harmony where you have 3 people all playing the one note together like an orchestra would be, like a tiny, tiny orchestra. Instead, it's 9, or rather 11 plus part writing. So it's everyone is a soloist, in other words.
Okay. Yeah.
No one can hide behind what their standmate is doing in the way an orchestral music would work. If in an orchestra...
So nobody's faking it.
It's impossible. Yeah, it's totally impossible, because every person who has, a note on the page, they're the only one playing that note.
Yeah.
That's the way chamber music works. I mean, of course, there's doublings and things like that occasionally, but the whole idea is that it's divided. The labor is divided amongst this very small group, because you get this very tactile. It's ferocious. It's in your face, but it's like Legolas. It can start and stop on a dime, because it's really, really, I'll say it again. It's very tactile and forward, and you record it really close up, so you hear all those strings, and you don't get any of that big, broad, wide orchestral sound. Which, though that's lovely, to me this was just immediately what jumped out. And so I pitched this to Ubisoft, and I intentionally made the music sound almost like 19th century music that had been warped rather dramatically through a modern filter. But it's definitely got one foot in that era, because I would not liken it to like Hollywood sounding music at all.
Yeah.
And I really thought, they've very proudly done the Hollywood thing, even though it's gone through different incarnations, quite, like Brian Tyler's approach on Black Flag, and Sarah Schachner or Chris Tilton's approach on Unity. I would describe all those as fitting within the Hollywood mindset, even if they're not necessarily clones of each other by any means. Or like Lauren Balfe is kind of the ultimate example. AC3 is the most thoroughly in that camp, and it all worked great for those games, and they're justifiably beloved scores. And my complete sidestepping of that was something that I didn't know if they were going to be into.
And clearly they were. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, they immediately were like, "When can you start? We absolutely love this." And I was
off to the races.
Then it was like, "Oh my God, how do I extrapolate this concept, this very detail-oriented, very kind of tedious thing, to 3.5 hours worth of music?" And because it was a big contract.
And within a year, that's a lot of work. You mentioned your soloists. You had a cello and a violin representing each of the siblings. And now your cellist is obviously Tina Guo, who's prominently featured in Journey, and she's one of your frequent collaborators.
Very much.
You also had your violinist Sandy Cameron, the pianist Ian Farrington, and soprano Helly Sedilus. So, like, how do you work with the soloist specific? Sorry, Cedillos. My bad.
Yeah, Helly Cedillos. Yeah, those. Yeah, all 4 of those are accurate, and they all have each 4 very different stories.
How do you work with the soloists? Is it like, do you write specifically for them, or is it a matter of who fits the bill, or do they improvise a little bit and the back and forth? How does that work with you?
Sure, absolutely. It's very much like casting a film, where you have to choose the right. If someone's really going to be shouldering a soloistic part, meaning that it is out in front of the rest and very featured, You want to make sure that they don't just have the technical ability for it, but that they play with the kind of emotional energy that is compatible, at least, if not beautifully uh, in sync with your idea compositionally. Um, in the case, so I associate the violin solos of Sandy Cameron with Jacob, and the cello solos with Evie and Tina. And there's a lot of dynamic music in the game to that end, where in the open world, the game has sort of two primary modes, in a manner of speaking. There's the open sandbox of wandering around London and doing side missions and all of that, and then of course there's the actual storyline missions.
Yeah.
And the missions have you alternating back and forth between Jacob and Evie, and each they have story specific missions that you do as each of them. But then in the open world, you can actually freely toggle back and forth who you play as. And so I wrote the music so that if I'm playing as Jacob and then I decide to switch to Evie, then all of Sandy's violin solos vanish and they're replaced by Tina's cello solos, so that the music is actually supportive of which character you're playing as, no matter who you're playing as, and no matter when you do it. Which of course added a whole other dimension of figuring out how to crack this musical puzzle, because every single piece had to have alternate solos. And these are not like the melody. These are full-fledged solos that very few people could actually pull off, because they're just written to be very kind of flashy, virtuosic solos, like a classical, almost like a concerto, which I would never dare do unless I have musicians that can make that shine. And so
Yeah.
Sandy was someone I hadn't worked with before, but I went to a concert and I saw her on stage, and she left me completely speechless. And so I hunted her down, and I don't think she's ever played on a game before. She couldn't have. She's really a classical performer, but she had been touring with Danny Elfman, doing his music of Tim Burton's films tour that he's been doing all over the world.
Oh, sweet.
She has this extended bit in it, doing this gypsy violin solo that's extremely difficult, as a recreation of a moment from Edward Scissorhands. And she just was amazing, because she, like Tina, she wasn't just skilled, but she had this charisma, and she had a stage presence that was just so fantastic. And so I got together with her, and we met, and then and actually she and Tina had worked together, so I asked Tina to connect us, and we got together, and I immediately said, you're gonna be the soul of this game. You're gonna be the star. And then of course Tina, everything like I said about casting, that's true, but also it's kind of like how, for example, George Clooney is in a huge number of the Coen brothers films, because they find themselves, it's not just that he's the right guy for the part, but they find themselves irresistibly writing parts that he's great for.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe my relationship with Tina. It's not just that she's the right cast, but the kind of writing I really love to do, she's always going to be the right casting for, because she's just one of those people I almost don't know how to write music without her at this point. She's just so core to my ideas about music. I mean, she's a close friend and musical soulmate. And so I knew that I wanted to feature her in as prominent a way as I had on Journey, except the affect of it is totally different.
Yeah.
The piano is very subtle for most of the score until the very end, in which case it steps forward as this third soloist.
Yeah.
But it's always flirting around the edges. And so in that case, I had never worked with Ian before, and I recorded all of the chamber ensemble parts in London at Abbey Road. And so I just told the contractor, I want to book a bunch of separate sessions with a true classical pianist, not a crossover guy, and not somebody that wouldn't know a bulk of the repertoire as a pianist, kind of thing. I really wanted someone like that who plays with that touch. But I left it to the contractor, and I said, find me somebody, this is a contractor who's very, very good. And I spoke at length with her, and I sent her mock-ups of, this is what we're talking about, so she could talk to some pianists. And then she presented to me Ian, and the guy blew my mind. The singer, Holly, is someone I've worked with many times. She's one of my closest friends in the world.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time with her and write for her constantly, and she just has a very special voice, and extreme pure. She has extreme command over her voice that I absolutely love. And I love that she somehow manages to surprise herself. She'll perform things where I'll say, "Oh, I loved that. Can we do it again like that?" And she'll say, "I doubt it. I don't know how I did that."
Wow.
And there's something magical about that, because it's not like she doesn't know what she's doing. But she can get herself into a place where these magical moments will happen. And I'm just like, I hope the mic was working.
Yeah.
And because it's not about technical perfection, because that's no problem. I mean, she can sight read like no one's business. And she's a very strong classical singer, but she'll go places with it that leave me speechless, where I'll forget that I'm working, and I just sit there captivated, and then I realize, like, she stopped singing, and the microphone is just sitting there recording empty silence while she's waiting for me to say something. And I'm like, oh right, of course, we're producing right now, aren't we? So anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but the soloist is a very important thing for me, especially on a score that features them so much as this. So
yeah,
I appreciate you indulging my long-winded answer.
Absolutely, man.